All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 38th panel of peers. Today's topic is going to be on veteran inclusion, and thank you for taking time out of your day here to come sit with us. So I'm Drew Freinberg. I'm a major in the Army. I'll just turn it over to you guys for a brief introduction, who you are, rank, and then we'll get into the questions.
Sure. My name's Nathan Taylor, former captain in the U.S. Army. I got out about a year and 4 months ago. I was a pilot, so I flew Blackhawks for a bit and then got a transition to fixed-wing aircraft, worked in military intelligence, and now I work for Merck. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name's Renee. Are we using this? Hello? No. My name's Renee Green. I served for 6 years in the Army. I got out of active duty in 2016 and out of the reserves last year. I was a sergeant, so I was enlisted, and I was a Korean cryptologic linguist. So I worked on signals intelligence within military intelligence, both in South Korea and in California. I currently work at Goldman Sachs.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mark Kroger. I'm a former major in the Army Special Forces, spent about 9 years active duty, 2 years reserve. Got out about 3 years ago, and I've been working in technology and in the entrepreneurial space since then. Awesome.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So Mark, when did you start off with you? What prompted you to serve? Was there a moment in time where you thought it like was a switch, where you were like, this is what I've got to do?
Yeah, so like many of us, post 9/11, I was a junior in high school in Indiana, and you see the horrific events taking place or unfolding on TV. I also, I felt a calling to serve. I also kind of wanted to get out of Indiana, to be honest, and the military seemed like a pretty safe place to do that without bothering my parents too much. So did that because of 9/11, and I felt a real calling, and I think I fulfilled my service. And once I felt like I had checked that box, then I was ready to move on and do something else.
We're both, I think, the class of 9/11, where that happened, and then you immediately went into service. So I think you and I have that in common.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
Renee, how about you?
Is 9/11 also. I was also a junior in high school, which is recent. It's not too long ago. And I'm very patriotic anyway. And then that day, I remember where I was, and I remember that I wanted to do something. Just didn't lead me into the military right away. So when I was in college, I was considering the ROTC, but I wasn't necessarily a morning person. So I was like, I don't know about that. To be very honest. And then when I got out, I realized some of the opportunities within the military, which I could leverage the skills back in business, which was my ultimate plan, so I could fulfill that sense of duty and then go back into business. So,
awesome. Nate, what about you?
Yeah, so I have a very similar story to Mark, and it must be something about the Midwest and wanting to get out and see what else is out there. So I have some family history. I had a great-grandfather who was in one of the first classes of pilots in World War I. And so I always kind of had that back of mind. But I wanted to see what else was beyond the corn patch, and the prospect of being from Iowa, and the prospect of adventure and service kind of all rolled into one with an education. Really attracted me to the military academy, and then being a pilot after that. So
awesome. For me, it was really my grandfather, Norman, who's on my dad's side, was a captain behind Patton's Third Army in World War II. He actually had the first case of using a cadaver's hip bone to reconstruct a guy's jaw.
Whoa.
And so he built this guy's jaw back. The guy got in a bar fight, got his jaw broke, and the guy, of course, came back to my grandfather and said, I know you fixed this, can you do it again? And instead of being upset, my grandfather, which to me is something I've tried to keep my whole life, is perspective. Instead of being upset, you spend all this time crafting and shaving this bone into your jaw. He said, well, it looks like it worked, right? So I just thought that was incredibly, patient to think about it that way. So Renee, what was your most rewarding experience in the service or in a uniform?
I'd probably say when I was in South Korea, I was 8 miles from the DMZ, and I was on alert like constantly. It was a very intense assignment, but and it was very physically demanding. But I think being able to work there in 2 different languages, like working with international forces, and just do things that I didn't think I would be able to do before. It was more personal. There's nothing I can really tell you that like, oh, this is the moment. But for me, I got a sense of satisfaction looking back at how I had changed. So.
How long were you at the DMZ?
I was stationed there for a year, and when I was in California, I went back to back to Korea 4 or 5 times on like short-term assignments. I probably should say learning Korean was an achievement. I thought that, yeah. I didn't know.
It's tough.
Yeah, I didn't know Korean before I went in the Army. So that was a 64-week course. So I think that was I had a sense of satisfaction from that, and then being able to leverage it in Korea, that would be the bridge.
And there's multiple levels, right? There's like level 1, 2, 3.
Yes. So there are 3 levels of proficiency, and I achieved the highest level of proficiency, and so it's like a high working proficiency. And Rachel's brother, I just found out it's her brother, worked with me, and he was on the extended scale. So you can also score above 3, so you can get 4 or 5, and that's like literally native proficiency,
Yeah.
which is
It's
her
like
brother.
Can't distinguish, right?
Yeah, so you take a test every year in listening, reading, speaking. So like I have Korean clients now. I'm able to, I type to them in Korean, speak to them in Korean. I can text in Korean. I have both keyboards on my phone and my computer. So being able to still use it now and remember it, I think that's also rewarding.
Yeah, it's a great skill that the military helps you get, for sure. Nate, what about you, man?
So I have one kind of rewarding and then one just kind of cool experience. So I was stationed in the Sahel region of Africa in a pretty remote area, and there was another kind of sister unit that was a few countries over, and one of the junior enlisted soldiers in that unit, his father passed away back in the U.S., and there were no commercial flights to get him out to go to the funeral, and so I volunteered. I said, we could take our plane down and grab him up and then take him back to a place where he can get a commercial flight out. So we did that in bad weather. I made that call. That was kind of scary. I wasn't sure it was the right one until we landed. And he was able to get back and attend his father's funeral. So that was pretty meaningful to me. And then just kind of a cool story. It's a really rewarding experience to be able to promote and then re-enlist your soldiers who you work with. As a commander, that's one of the really cool things you get to do. And so one of my higher performing soldiers, he's from Chicago, and asked if he could hop on a training flight on a weekend to go back to Chicago to re-enlist at Wrigley Field. So we did. Early Saturday morning, we got up, we flew from Savannah on a training flight to Chicago. And we got to the front of the gates. There was a game about to start. And so one of the managers invited us down to the dugout, and the Cubs were down in the dugout warming up before the game. And so we got to re-enlist this guy in the locker room while the Cubs were getting geared up for the game. And some of them stood around and watched, and that was a pretty cool experience. They just won the World Series that year, so.
Yeah. Awesome. So tell me about a failure. What were your takeaways from the failure? Any of you guys can jump in on this one. These are tough.
Yeah, well, as anybody in my class knows, I'm no stranger to failure. So, but yeah, like that's one of the beauties of being in the military is that you're allowed to fail. That
Right.
like you're promoted faster than you really feel comfortable with, and you're put into positions in foreign countries that where you've never been before. In my case, I was right out of the Special Forces qualification course, which is nearly 2 years in duration. Then I go to a team. The team's been around since the Vietnam era. It's a family. It has a legacy. And then now I'm the guy in charge, and I have to tell somebody who's 10 years my senior what to do. And at that point, we were transitioning from combat operations to partnership operations, so more diplomatic scenarios. And I took my team to a couple of countries in the Middle East, and my right-hand man, for lack of a better term, was still very much programmed for combat, and we're trying to make friends, and he never
Couldn't pivot.
adjust, and it was catastrophic to relations, and I ended up having having to relieve him and sleep right next to him
Yeah.
in a Jordanian compound. It was really tough, and I felt like I failed the team. I failed Dave. Yeah, like anything, it comes down to the human level. That's what is going to be most rewarding and most challenging.
Yeah.
So I was, my big failure was we failed this big inspection that grounded my aviation unit for 2 weeks. It was really embarrassing. Imagine like a big Army, they have an inspector, like an inspector general team that comes down and digs through all of your training files. They give you tests, oral exams, flight checks for all your pilots. And if you don't score near 100% on that stuff, you fail the inspection. There's some pretty big consequences to that. So I had just come back from deployment in South America, and I was very operationally focused. I thought we should be caring more about what's going on overseas than back home. And so I didn't allocate my time and energy, my resources to preparing for this inspection. And it really bit me in the butt because it stopped all of our training. And so I couldn't replace those guys that were downrange for an additional 2 weeks. So I had to tell people's families that, sorry, your husband, your wife has to stay in Africa or South America for another 2 weeks because we failed this training program and I can't replace them in time. That was really tough. So my takeaway from that was to really see the big picture, walk through the second and third order effects of that decision and how that might affect the people that I care most about and that I'm charged with making sure they return home safe and on time.
My big one, I was teaching Korean at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, and I had 2 students who were on the verge of failing out of the school. And at the time during the administration, if you failed in a training school, you get kicked out of the military, so their career would have been done at that point. And I realized that I was supervising civilian instructors from South Korea, and I really wasn't paying attention to the fact that they weren't paying a lot of attention to these students because they weren't the best at Korean naturally. And I did not do everything I could have done to help them initially. There's a lot of things that I could have done differently, the extra classes and whatnot. So I kind of reassessed, and then we started meeting in the morning and in the afternoon. The military mantra, especially in the Army, is just, when you're out there, not leaving somebody behind just because they're not naturally gifted. And that was a big takeaway for me in the military, which I try to translate in the civilian world, is just because somebody doesn't come out the gate being the best, in a couple of years with some focus, they may be the best person. So we got together as a team and kind of reassessed how we're treating students that don't come in super stellar. And they subsequently did pass the exam, but it was with a lot of effort at the end. And I thought that was a failure as a supervisor of the department to not have noticed these interventions earlier.
Yeah, it's tough. The responsibility is feel like you never can do enough, right? You never do enough. But,
when you realize it's somebody's life that's gonna be, some people go into military and that's their only option, and they're providing income for their family. Like, it got very personal. Mm-hmm. So it was beyond hey, they're gonna fail this class. It was like, this might be the livelihood for their family, and it's not even that lucrative in the first place. So I really was like, I need to do something. This is a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, so within the same theme of leadership challenges, a lot of us are asked, as Mark alluded to, a lot of us are asked to take charge maybe before we really feel ready. I was a first lieutenant. I got command of a logistics company and basically got sent to Afghanistan to lead them in one of the worst areas of Afghanistan as a brand new first lieutenant, basically. It was so we all have, or Nate and I have our branch pins on here. So I have the engineer castle. He's got the aviation wings. If Mark had his, he would be the crossed arrows. Yours is
American flag.
Yeah, you guys might know that.
She's patriotic.
Yeah. But so I took charge of a unit that was completely outside of my skill set, and I didn't really know. And I never had. So you usually start as an officer in the military, at least. You usually start as a platoon leader. So you have about 30 or so soldiers, 30 to 40 soldiers. Special operations is a little different, but 30 to 40 soldiers, somewhere between maybe $5 to $20 million worth of equipment. And you're either building something like we do in the engineers, or you're leading some kind of chalk or something like that. Going maybe not. Yeah, maybe not. Yeah, different worlds. But nonetheless, tell me about a time, Nate, where you were kind of thrust into that role where you were like, I don't feel ready for this, but the Army says, yeah, you're ready, do it.
Sure. Gosh, there's a lot to think about here. One of the really challenging things was my first job was actually company command coming out of flight school, and it was because it was the rear detachment. Half the unit was forward in Afghanistan, and half were back in the U.S. So my boss, the actual company commander, she was forward in Afghanistan, and so I had responsibility for maintaining peace and order and training back in the rear. This is in Fort Hood, Texas. And the first week I got on the job, I had to deal with a spousal abuse case. I had to deal with a 23-year-old kid who was getting his children taken away from him and got his car repoed from the lot. So these are, being a family crisis mediator.
And how old were you? How old were you at this time?
I was 23 myself, 24.
Yeah.
So not at all ready to prepare for these types of challenges. I was thinking, okay, I'm going to go fly an airplane and go deploy and do my mission, and I got the completely opposite and unexpected experience. So that was something I struggled with, and I just tried to put on the face and do what I saw people on TV do, the media. Be really serious and try to life coach this kid who's my same age or older in some cases.
Yeah.
But that has a very rapidly maturing effect if you do that long enough, or many times. I think that's something that a lot of military people who have led in the service have is that kind of rapid maturation through events like that you don't expect but have to deal with.
If you were to sum that up in a word or two, would you say maturation, or would you say something? What word would you use?
Oof. Like the process of that?
Just your this is the role. Hey, you're going to be the new company commander of this, and getting comfortable with that. What is the?
Man, I don't know if there's a single word, but it's just being out of your comfort zone. You're just falling forward. You try to you try to get back up whenever you stumble.
Yeah.
And I think maturation is probably a good way to put that.
Yeah. Awesome.
You have a similar experience?
Yeah. And in the Virgin Islands, so I actually did 90 days of active duty with the New York District, the Army Corps of Engineers, so that I could get my full veterans benefits to come here. It turned out to be one of my most rewarding experiences in a uniform by far. And we showed up to the island, and there's a ton of NGOs and governmental organizations, of course. There's FEMA, there's the Virgin Islands Emergency Management Agency, there's Department of Education, there's Department of Energy, there's all these huge stakeholders there. I showed up and I reported to the commander of this forward, basically recovery office. And I got there and he said, Drew, I'm going to be out of the office tomorrow. I need you to go to this meeting with FEMA and be the Army Corps of Engineers representative, and give me the notes after the meeting, and we'll figure out a plan. So I went to the meeting, and basically the governor's number one priority for the Virgin Islands is, after the hurricanes Maria and Irma in 2017, was to get education back up, so get all the schools back up and running. So kids back in school means parents go to work, means people can start working on houses, which has all these other second order and third order effects. So we had this meeting. Here's the governor's priority. Who's going to do it? And everybody looked around the room, and they looked at the Army Corps of Engineers, me. I had just gotten there. And so, I hardly even knew there were 3, U.S. Virgin Islands, let alone, so It was baptism by fire, and after 2 weeks or so, we got all the schools back in, and thousands of children and hundreds of teachers and stuff got back in, and it was a really, really rewarding experience. But definitely wasn't ready when I got there. But there's a truth to you're ready. Like someone looks at you and says you're ready. You need to trust them and deliver. So, anyone else want to add?
Yeah, when I was in South Korea, I was in a tactical signals intelligence platoon, and which that requires is that you have to carry a rucksack on your back that's about 80 to 90 pounds up mountains, and then do the mission outside. And I was the only female in the platoon, which is like, we had like 30 people in the platoon or so. So and then we also had a platoon sergeant who was in the Army Band Reserves and then sent to Korea. So that was, needless to say, he was in shock. Nice guy, but he was not prepared for the mission. So, and I was a specialist, so lower enlisted. It'd be like just a very new, I don't even know how to equate it to like an analyst at work. Like somebody just got out of college like a couple years before, like that junior. So I was slotted to be the platoon sergeant. They made me a corporal, so I was a fake non-commissioned officer at the time. And I started going to the gym and putting weighted vests on and running and like doing pull-ups and whatnot to get myself stronger. And just to get respect from the guys. Like when we go on ruck marches, I'd put my bowling ball and stuff in the back just to make my bag heavier. So I was always carrying extra weight. So when I would do the mission, it felt lighter. So that was a challenge. But, by not saying a lot, that's what taught me, like by not saying a lot, but through my actions, I got a lot more respect from the guys in the platoon. And it turned out to be, it was an awesome assignment. So.
Yeah, awesome. We have a bunch of questions here I want to get through. So I'm just going to kind of fire them off at you guys and let me know.
How we prepared.
That's right. So one of you guys describe a high op tempo environment, high operational tempo environment. Mark, would you mind doing this one? What's high op tempo? What does that mean?
I mean, it's really hard to describe because my memory is kind of blurry, but from what I remembered, it was all right, so we're going to this country, get everything ready, get all the trucks ready, like let's load some pallets out here. We'll be flying out of here in 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden that mission's canceled. Then we're like, all right, let's go to sniper school. Or like, it was very, like,
go.
It's hard to describe what high op tempo was, but it changed every day. And you don't have time to think about what you just missed. You just got to look forward. And that's the beauty of the team is there's not a whole lot of that mentality within the special operations community. There's not a whole lot of, you're not doing an autopsy. You're really just like moving forward. Everybody's professional. You tell them what they need to do. Actually, they're going to tell me what they need to do because they're the experts, and I'm the guy with the signature. That's it. So yeah, it's a high op tempo, changed day to day, and that's
so for me, high op tempo in a lot of ways means high stress in some essences. So how do you guys? I'll just go down the line. How do you guys deal with high op tempo, high stress? What are your ways to come down from that?
So my highest stress, highest op-tempo environment was at that same spot in Africa around the Lake Chad Basin. So we were doing some counter Boko Haram, ISIS, West Africa work, supporting the Special Forces guys on the ground there. And we were short-staffed, didn't have enough pilots, so I had to fly every day in addition to all my admin and leadership duties. So I was putting in 16, 18-hour days every day, but I always made sure that I got to the gym for at least an hour. And I tried to do it with a new person on my team to kind of build that camaraderie. But if you do that long enough, it kind of becomes like a hygienic event, like brushing your teeth, combing your hair, shaving. Like you get up and you have to do it. Your body craves it. And it's a great way to reduce the stress hormones in your body and just really keeps you centered and focused to be able to execute your duties to the best of your ability. So exercise for me was like key, non-negotiable, had to do it every day.
Yeah. Right.
So exercise, I like interval training, keep it very exciting. And then I like to do things that are just very fun, like exciting, but counters the stress in the same kind of level. So like maybe take a crazy trip or do something that's just like a lot of fun, like I could travel, hop on a plane or do something different like that. That kind of just keeps the balance for me. So you release all that stress, but you're also increasing like enjoyment, like instead of just sitting there and watching TV and just feeling kind of like a gump. So.
Yeah, two things. I think one was keeping a light sense of humor. So you can imagine that with a team of 12 people, we did that pretty regularly. But the other thing is it's a family, so you have to nurture the relationships. Took Dave out to a few steak dinners, make sure we had that conversation one-to-one. It wasn't always cold and extremely too professional. You have to humanize it. So I think that was how we managed.
Yeah, the humor is definitely, military humor is something else. I mean, I know you got some veterans in the room. It's a little weird at times, but yeah, it's definitely.
I want to add something to that too. So, for me, I'm a big introvert, so I needed that time kind of to myself at the end of the day. And so when I'm interacting with people, flying, I'm talking, we're doing a mission, having to go to the embassy to brief people. It really wears you down, at the end of the day. And so I really needed like the last 30 minutes of the day to not think about work. So I developed the reading habit. I really try to read something that had nothing to do with war or history or geography. So it ended up being
romance novels.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all right. Hey. Secret's out. It's fine.
Thanks. That was the end of the brief. That was my non-Google fact.
Yeah. He was working out a lot, so he wanted to make the cover of the steamy romance novel. Yeah. Anyway.
Goals.
Yeah. So going from high up tempo back to family, friends, civilian job in some cases for us reservists, how did you make that transition to like, all right, I'm back home, like I need to come down, besides working out, besides humor and that kind of thing, what were there any thing that you looked forward to that helped you adjust back to that different speed?
I was trying to make my life more normal because I realized that I was a little too amped up all the time. Like in Korea, we would get alerted in the middle of the night. Like we were constantly on missions. We were out in the field. So you don't realize that you're wound up. Like when you're asked